Hi, welcome to the 25th Anniversary International Festival of Arts and Ideas virtual stage. We are pleased to collaborate with the Yale China Association to present this program featuring the 2020 Yale China Artist Fellow, Zhang Hong. I'm Melissa Huber, the festival's producer, and I'll start with recognition that the International Festival of Arts and Ideas is created and produced on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill, Pagosset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac in the land we call home, Connecticut. We hope that from wherever you are, you take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you are on and the history of the place that you are in. You can find out more about native land near you at nativeland.ca. The International Festival of Arts and Ideas stands with Black Lives Matter and with countless citizens in our own city and across the country who are exercising their right to protest the systemic racism at the root of police violence. The festival stands in solidarity with Black and Brown communities who are targeted and abused by unjust systems of oppression. Since 2015, the festival has partnered with the Yale China Association to create deep cultural exchanges between arts activators and arts fellows and the greater New Haven community. We look forward each year to meeting the new fellows, learning about their work, providing connections to the field and to greater New Haven, and during the festival, presenting this public-facing program to share a snapshot of each fellow's work while here in New Haven. I'd like to invite you as you're watching to type questions into the chat during the presentation, and we'll address them during the Q&A section. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Vice President and Director of Programs at Yale China Association, Leslie Stone.
Thank you so much, Missy. I'm so delighted to represent the Yale China Association. Yale China bridges American and Chinese cultures by creating lasting, transformative partnerships and experiences in education, health, and the arts. We are so honored to collaborate with the International Festival of Arts and Ideas on Yale China's Arts and Arts Activator Fellowships. We are especially grateful to Missy Huber and Tiffany Hopkins for all that they have done to make this year's fellowships so successful. We are deeply grateful for the sponsorship and partnership of Yale's Council on East Asian Studies, the Yale School of Drama, Trustee Joan Chanak, and all the members of the Yale China Arts Committee. Each year, the Arts and Arts Activator Fellows brings cutting-edge artists and arts administrators from Hong Kong to New Haven for 6 months of exploration and creation at Yale and in New Haven. Today, our arts fellow, Zhang Hong, will create a wealth of new work that demonstrates how incredibly productive she has been while here in New Haven since January. Our presenter, Zhang Hong, is an academic, curator, and visual artist with a master's in cinema studies and a PhD in visual art studies. Her research interests include contemporary art in Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta, and also gender politics in film. She has previously taught film and visual arts at the School of Creative Media at City University of Hong Kong and the Academy of Visual Arts at Hong Kong Baptist University. She is the curator of Hong Kong in Poor Images and also Blown Away, Art, Science, and Extreme Weather. Moderating this session will be Nancy Yao Masbach. Nancy is president of the Museum of Chinese in America, MoCA. If you have not visited MoCA in New York City, I urge you to do so and see how this amazing organization under Nancy's leadership promotes understanding of Chinese Americans through arts, culture, and research. Prior to her time at MoCA, Nancy served as executive director of Yale China, and I was so lucky to have her as my boss. At Yale China, Nancy's strong interest in the role of the arts in promoting mutual understanding was at the heart of the development of Yale China's arts program into what it is today. Thank you, Hong and Nancy.
That's so generous, Leslie, and definitely very accurate to describe Zhang Hong's work. And welcome everyone to this conversation with Zhang Hong. We're so excited that we get to preview her work here, both her piece, her trajectory, which is a short film that we will be showing, as well as a website she's created during her fellowship time here as well. And what I love most about Zhang Hong's work, and look for different threads as you are exposed to her pieces here, are some of the themes that you carry forward. And I won't disclose them all here because we want everyone to enjoy them and see them for the first time. But I'm so moved by how it affected me, and all that, just the work that you did combining different elements also from China and from the US. So I'm so excited to present this to you in this audience today. So how we'll run this is we'll present the film, and then we will also invite Zhang Hong back to invite her to share about her website, which is a supplement. And then she has a guest who is featured on her website, and we'll have a short conversation between Zhang Hong and her guest, Roshi. And then we'll come back, and so prepare your questions as you're watching the film, and we'll come back and have a conversation with Zhang Hong where we can present those questions. But so indebted to Yale China Association for continuing to bridge grassroots U.S.-China relations through arts, which is probably the most powerful tool one can have as we see the global discord and the complications within relations. Art can always bridge the unspoken. So we're so glad to have Zhang Hong be a bright light in this space, especially today. So why don't we do that, Zhong? If you're ready for that, let's cue the film, and we'll come back to you all in about 15 minutes. Enjoy the show.
In spring 2020, I'm stuck in an Arctic in North America while I'm digging into a Chinese woman's story. It's a tough work as I've only got some fragments of her life. I have to piece them together and fill in with my imagination. After a while, I gave up. Now what you will see are just some digressions. Her name is Zhang Jianying. She was born in 1926 in Chaoshan Prefecture in Guangdong, the place I come from. When she was 4 months old, her parents immigrated to Kedah in British Malaya, breeding her together. In 1943, she joined the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army and the Communist Party of Malaya in the following year. I grew up watching many strong women. They are communists who joined the party after participating in warfare.
服从党的决定，坚决抗日到底，不妥协，不投降，为无产阶级事业奋斗到底，为无产阶级事业奋斗到底。
Malaysians who are witty guerrilla girls.
打吧，好，把他们引过来，挂线。哎，好。
Secret agents who go through the enemy's torture and eventually died for their state.
都有看守。
你战胜了敌人，保卫了组织，同志们向你致以革命的敬礼。
Represented in the films made in the People's Republic of China, even prevalent in today's soap operas. The communist belief in gender equality enticed women from the domestic sphere. When she was studying at a specialized school for Chinese language, the Japanese invaded Malaya. She had to quit her studies and work in a cigarette factory. She witnessed the Japanese brutal attack on the villagers and the British prisoners of war. Later, the head of the factory was arrested and she got involved. They burned cigarettes on her beaten arms and legs. After she came out of prison, she joined the army. Literature shows that the nationalist struggles in Asia recruited women, but many joined the party to rebel against feudalistic and patriarchal oppression. Her dearest CPM comrade was encouraged by Mulan's story since she was a child, because her father's disregard and forced her to quit school.
他从来也没做过什么坏事，仅多不过是喜欢打猎罢了。谁教你从小就教他使枪射箭，把他心做玩野了，还要来怪我？
Women heroes are pictured as being fascinated with weapons.
我要是有一支钢枪那就好了。
Sword, arrow, gun, symbols of masculinity and power. I wonder if to be transformed into a fighting agent, women have to abandon their femininity. They all dressed as the same as men. I could hardly find her in this picture. They like uniforms, not gay dresses, writes Mao Zedong. Yet the women who enter the war zone project the image of liberated women. It threatens the patriarchal order entrenched within the Communist Party. Therefore, they need to be put in the frame of family. In 2013, one of my friends conducted interviews of Zhang, intended to be published as oral history in China. The text doesn't mention much of her personal life. I only knew that she has married 3 times. The text, however, says she married to her comrade in 1946. It was her first marriage. In Chinese propaganda films, there is always a male comrade leading the female. Look at the sets and angles. The woman is always looking up her male comrade, usually superior, for his recognition. Even though sometimes she's standing in a higher position than him. In socialist realism, the rules of filmmaking are subject to ideology.
所以啊，只有投身到集体斗争中去，把你个人的命运跟大众的命运联系起来，那才有出路。在我们地球上，出现了一个新的国家——苏联，你知道吗？
听说过，可是
好吧，你喜欢读书吧？
我喜欢。
好，那我给你些书看。
那太好了。
Close-up are used to highlight the glitters in her eyes after her male comrade brings the seeds of revolution. Together with the books from Soviet Union is their film technique, montage. A dissolve to the blossom hints at her innermost discovery of a brave new world, interpolating her to be a communist. Parallel with the women communists' passionate look in Chinese propaganda, I found these women guerrillas looks in a British newsreel.
Now, what I wonder are these women thinking as they leave the fear.
Apparently, the cameraman, reinforced by the commentary, tended to take an ethnographic approach to capture the uncanny mentality of the women who were being filmed, assuming they wouldn't look back. The primitive, the woman, the communist, gazing at this triple order caused the white males unease. These women resist the male and imperialist gaze by looking back firmly to disrupt this looking relationship. It was during the Malaya emergency. CPN was declared as bandit. She was arrested during one mission. After a couple of months in jail, she was exiled and lost touch with her then husband, never to meet again.
Khi到就去掠到輔導出境，我出境了就無過去了嘛，買了，然後我就304人啊，要8日到了該當山當，我到了該國民黨，連挨他連去，連都沒死啊。
She was captured by the then CMP government immediately after her ship boarded her hometown. It was in July 1949. She spent 3 months in CMP's jail before the CPC took over the sovereign power in October. This time, she experienced the prison run by her own nation. After the PRC was established, she came out of jail and worked in the cultural and educational department in the city trade unions. She had her second marriage. Until the 1950s, the Down to the Countryside movement began. She was sent to countryside to do labor work, forced to be separated from her second husband, although she managed to find another partner later. The Cultural Revolution swept China, and she was put in jail for the fourth time in her life. Eventually, in 1999, she joined the CPC. Yet, she spent lots of her later years collecting literature about CPM. This is part of her collections. She wrote her memoir titled Areca Flower. A tropical plant originates from Malaya. In 2005, they endowed her the 16 years Chinese People's Anti-Japanese War Victory Medal. She died in 2016. Her oral history failed to get through censorship, meaning she's mute in history. An immigrant, a colonial, a bandit, a communist, an intellectual who had suspicious overseas experience. She became a bare life, a conception of life coined by Agamben. For being outside of the system, she was deprived of any rights. Any sovereign power could exterminate her by its law. As a woman, Her personal life is accidentally entangled with the turbulent history of the 20th century. British, Japanese, CPM, CMP, CPC, colonialism, World War II, civil war, ideological war. Different political powers took over her life. She became a case of biopolitics. Perhaps only in film, biopolitics could be romantic.
同志，
班长，
田菊英同志，
舅舅那个雁呀飞来哟，谁落谁的国歌呀，喜的我笑盈盈。妈妈你去呀，千万里呀，高山的雪莲花呀，不美吗？只要你不把我一脸骂呀，只要你兄弟不把呀回家抓。
Hello.
That was wonderful, Hong. And now you bring your guest up. Would you like to show us the website? I know a lot of people have thoughts and just letting the film sit with them for a bit. So we'll have a conversation with Hong about the film, but she'd also like to provide the supplemental explanation of the website that you created and bring on your guest thereafter.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for your introduction. So now I'm going to share with you the website as the other part of my project. It's a participatory project, and I invited the participants to share their personal story, also their personal object. So you can have a look. So now this is the website, and it's an interactive website. So you can see that there's so many dots and lights which represent different participants, their life trajectory. So for example, when you hover over the dots, you can see the participant, their name and the year when they live in this place. So for example, this is Ruth, and she lived in Germany in Freiburg in 1936, and then in 1937, she moved to Italy, and then later, by zooming in, you can see that she moved to United States and New York in 1939. And then, apart from the personal trajectory on the map, when you click on each dot, you can also see there's the object of the participant, and it's travel alongside with them. And also this paragraph show the narrative of the participant when they talk about how and why they get this project and they get this object and how it means for them. So today, I'm very glad to invite one of my participants, Zhuo Xiyu, to share her idea and her experience of participating in this project. So here you can see this is Zhuo Xi's object. And sorry, it's here. Yes. So now allow me to introduce Zhuo Xi. She's the third year medical student at Johns Hopkins.
Hi, Hong. Thanks for having me today. And thank you so much for having me as part of your project as well. I actually was so excited when I saw the email that you sent to everybody asking for stories that I forwarded to a bunch of my friends. And one friend who was male actually sent me the email back and just highlighted how you only want to recruit women. So I was just so excited that I totally forgot about the project. So like for me, like, you know, as an immigrant, my identity has been really important to me, growing up and to this day. So as it shows on the hertrajectory.com, I was born in Tianjin, China, and I moved when I was 5 or 6 from there. When I was 5, my mom had an opportunity to go to the United States, and so she left me and my father in China for a year. And then after a year, we eventually made our way to her in Houston, Texas. And one of the things I really distinctly remember is how her nightstands and her tables were all cardboard boxes. And I think, you know, I think your film today, and I think what you highlight in a lot of the stories, is that are these really distinct immigrant stories that are not, you know, romanticized as they often are in films and more generalizing stories. I think like nowadays we are beginning to see more of these immigrant stories that are not entirely happy, right? But before this was really depicted commonly, I think we easily forget about like how the act of immigration is rarely purely romantic or good. And it can be an ugly aspiration, I think, for many people who often maybe sacrifice their own present for a potential future that's better for themselves or their loved ones. And we kind of forget how multidimensional that can really be, especially for women, as you pointed out. For example, for my mother, she was a doctor in China, and she had to give up her job in China to come to the United States. And it was actually my dad's idea to come to the United States because he wasn't doing well in his job. So I know that, you know, back then they had a lot of fights about that. She had to give up her own personal things and aspirations for her family in the future. And so, yeah, great project. And I love how you built this visual narrative of the website, and you see all of our threads kind of coming across and crossing each other. And so in a way, the journeys that feel very lonely actually kind of don't, because you see how the lines parallel each other, I think, and you see how our stories are also interwoven in the fabric of stories of all these other women who were before us, who were with us, or who will come after us. So yeah, thank you so much for having me as part of your project.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for your sharing. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you both. And Roshi, thank you for sharing that. That was so interesting for me also. As the Museum of Chinese in America, our main mission is to tell those untold stories. Hong, I have so many questions for you. I think maybe what we'll start is encourage everyone to send some questions into the live comments and we'll pick them up. But just her trajectory, starting from the uppermost, your pick of that title, and then the complementary website. And I almost feel like it's a, you know, trajectory. There's like a motion to it because the object is traveling. How did you come to that? And how were you thinking about that title from your sort of the genesis of the project?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nancy, for your question. So before I jump into introducing my project, I would like to thank you for thank you for all the people who support me for this project. So especially all the friends from Yale China Association, and also all the participants who really so generous to share their stories and with me. And also my project collaborator, especially Sarah. She did a very wonderful performance in the film. She's a dancer. And also Maria's, he's the website designer who helped me to create this website within a very short time. So it's amazing. I really appreciate them. Yeah, so now before I answer your question, maybe I can give a little bit background about how I come up with the idea about these two works. So even though my project comprises of two seemingly very different artworks, a short film and reflecting on a historical figure, and internet artwork representing the participants' trajectories and personal objects. They both originate from my concern about national and cultural identity, immigration, and gender. My motivation to create this project is to invite the audience to look into these issues, given that we are in a moment of rising nationalism and closing borders to immigration. So the first topic I want to bring up is about nationalism. I gave a lecture last year for a media study course in Hong Kong for the master program students. Most of them come from mainland China. I couldn't forget about their expressions when I showed them the 5 races under one union flag used by the provisional government of the Republic of China in 1912, which signifies the invention of the brand new concept of Chinese nation. Most of the students were so shocked, obviously, because it may be the first time they got to know that this concept, Chinese nation, actually emerged only about 100 years ago. The majority of the students who got education in China, including I myself, always took the concept of Chinese nation for granted. Another interesting thing that helped me to rethink is the story of my hometown. As I mentioned in the film, that I came from a region in South China called Chaoshan, where people speak the dialect in tradition instead of Mandarin. So actually many local older generation never speak Mandarin. None of my grandparents do. And it is a region that many people use to immigrate or commute to Southeast Asia. And it begins from the 17th century. The local people took a special boat to travel to today's Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia for trade as part of the maritime Silk Road. And later it changed to ship. That's why today many Thai Chinese, Malayan Chinese, and Chinese Singaporeans could speak those Chinese dialects because that's what their ancestors spoke. And my great-grandpa from my mom's side went to Singapore to do business, and the other great-grandfather from my dad's side immigrated to Thailand. So for me, it seems that for the older generation, like my great-grandparents, it's even easier to travel to Southeast Asia than to North China, like Beijing. So that's the situation of Zhang Jianying, the protagonist in the film, as well, her family. So from this perspective, I got to unfetter the idea of national border. So I realized that the nation, in fact, come much later than we thought. And by contrast, the so-called globalization appeared earlier than we thought. And the anthropologist Anderson defined a nation as imagined community. And then Arjun Appadurai theories on globalization kind of extend Anderson's idea to imagined worlds to indicate how the globe has got smaller today. So he theorized different aspects of globalization. Among them is the so-called ethnoscape. The ethnoscape means, quote, the landscape of persons who constitute the shifting world in which we live. Tourists, immigrants, refugees, exiles, guest workers, and other moving groups and persons constitute an essential feature of the world and appear to affect the politics and between nations to a hitherto unprecedented degree, end quote. So from these words, it seems that the moving groups have become a significant factor in shaping the contemporary international politics, the imagined worlds. I believe one feature of these imagined worlds lies in their connectedness, and that's the first point I attempt to show in the participatory project in a visual way. I think the many lines across the oceans could somehow directly represent the degree of our free travels nowadays. When I fly from Hong Kong to here in the early January, I couldn't help keep checking on the flight trajectory. And I got so excited when I saw I was crossing the North Pacific Ocean. And the junctions and parallels of different participants' trajectories represented by different colors also give a sense of this connectedness. I think this sense is worth emphasizing because the imagined worlds has got frustrated at this current moment. The moving groups are certainly subject to changing shifts in capital and national policies. Not only the COVID-19 has caused a temporal restriction of national borders, but also the intensifying conflicts in national relations may also lead to the closing borders to immigration in the long run. So I guess many audience have already got this feeling by reading the recent news. So far I have already connected with 18 participants of this project. The majority of them are the broader New Haven public who currently live around. Although they have diverse backgrounds, some of them made the decision of immigration by themselves. Some of them moved by parents, and some are left without choice because they are asylum seekers. But as immigrants, they share the interest in discussing the topics of cultural identity, and they all have their very profound understandings on this topic, as you can see from Joyce's sharing. So actually, I have learned a lot of knowledge from the conversation with them, and it was the most intriguing part of my creation process. And the last but not least concern of mine is gender. I did my PhD research in women's art study, so I got to read a lot of feminine theories. And I was so shocked to realize that the patriarchy could insinuate almost every bit of our life. To realize is upsetting for sure, but it also brings about the liberation of our thinking. So often we take the gender representation for granted. Like earlier when I do some research and talk about it with Emily from Yale China Association, and seems that Emily was so surprised to notice that women could join the army at that time. And maybe because I guess in the history of the United States, not until recent decades that women were recruited in the military. But I also was so surprised to notice that it's pretty natural for me to think about women joining the army back then, because I grew up watching so many Chinese movies showing women heroes. So it triggered my thoughts, and I went back to make a film study approach to look into how those women characters were represented in the films. So that's so far I would like to talk about three main concerns that why drove me to create this project. Thank you.
Yeah, that's you've mentioned so many different themes and topics, and I think you've whet our appetite to ask you many, many questions. I'll start off as we continue to gather questions for our audience members in the live comment area. You know, we often talk about push factors and pull factors when we talk about immigration. And also likewise at the museum, we really look at the last 100 years as having so many diverse known and unknown variables that have impacted people's life decisions. And I just wonder, in your main subject, Zhang Jianying, you mentioned, you know, the 4 different political parties she's involved in. She's in jail four different times. She has 3 different husbands. Maybe she should have had 4. But at the same time, it's all of these different episodes in one person's life. When you think about her life holistically, as you've gone through and thinking aligned with the last 100 years of history, what do you think are the major push and pull factors? Do you feel that she was pushed into her life, or she really wanted to be pulled into it? So what I mean is, what attracted her, or was it the draw of something in particular? Was it power? Was it camaraderie? What were the main variables that attracted Zhang Jianying to her life? Because she does, you see repetition in her choices.
Yeah. So for this question, I think that's very interesting for me to think about. And also why at the very beginning, when I heard of Zhang Jianying's story, I just could not stop thinking about that. And then I tried to ask my friend that can I make a film based on this oral history. He conducted the interview with Zhang before she passed away a couple of years ago. So I think I read the text. My friend sought out the oral history, and I just see that it's very dry and almost tease out all of her personal thinking, like just narrated when did she come to Malaysia at that time, and then when did she join. So it's actually very difficult for the readers to think about or to guess that what's her motivation. So that's why I can hardly find out the answer from the text, from the interview. So that's why I have to do some research, like some literature about the Malaysia Communist Party, that how did they summon the women or recruited women to join the guerrilla, or why they would like to join the party after that. So also I try to find those images in the film histories, and also it's very interesting because at the end I ended up with finding the mechanism behind those representation in the film. So just like you can see that they try to highlight as a male comrade guiding the female to join it. It's usually that introduce the Soviet Union theory, the revolution seeds, something. But usually it's so rare to find that a woman actually have this, you can say, awakeness by herself. So I think for Zhuang Jianying, I think her own story maybe because she was in Malay, at that time it's British Malaya, haven't really the independent country. So she witnessed there's a colonialism. And then maybe later when the Japanese army intruded Malaya, it's a very direct trigger like for her outrage, like she witnessed those torture, and also later herself was involved. And I think maybe that's the very beginning to trigger her make the decision to join the army. Then later, I think at that time, to make the other decision to join the party is more like a political decision instead of a very basic fight with the inventor. I think that's also because just to think about our early 20th century, that communism is a very romantic and radical political thing that some young people who believe that they are in the avant-garde or cutting edge, something is cool to do. Because I also heard this from my mom. She joined the Communist Party when she was 18, and she told me that all the excellent peers around her all did that. So that's why she made that decision to join the Chinese Communist Party at that time. Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of the footage you showed from some of the films may be very surprising for our audience as well. Just like your students who were quite surprised when you showed them some components of the flag in the Republic of China. And I think what we struggle with in America today is, the untold story in the American narrative, what's missing from textbooks. And I think a lot of what's happening with Black Lives Matter and the oppression and why so many statues are being torn down, because the full history hasn't been presented. The film footage you showed us was quite a romanticization of the Communist Party. And I just wonder what is, I guess, how do I phrase this in a way? It's how open do you feel, or accessible is the full story to some young people in classrooms today in China? Because the surprise that your students had in Hong Kong, and just wondering, we know in the US that the narrative, and I think it's been a slight enlightenment period in the US in the last year, 2-3 years, that we realize the narrative is absolutely broken. So how cognizant are young people in China today with the onslaught of social media and access information that perhaps a narrative is slightly romanticized?
I think because I've been moved to Hong Kong since 5 years ago, so I've been away from the mainland China for a while. But I still keep on checking that how's going on, especially in today's university, the campus in China, because I think that's very crucial to let the young student notice what's actually about the history, about the current situation in the world. And it's actually concerned me a lot because I get to know that lots of them, they never heard of lots of historical events, like when is the establishment of the so-called this concept Chinese nation, and also they didn't know about lots of other things like the 1989 in what happened in June. They never heard of that. So I think the censorship is really increasing, or the very narrow world for this young generation. So it's kind of upset me, and I would like to seek for some opportunity to just unfasten their very strong belief of this Chinese nationalism a little bit, if I could. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure that's not always easy. You bring up Foucault's concept of biopolitics. And I think biopolitics is such an underused term. I mean, you hear geopolitics quite a bit more, you know, from the same sort of source, Foucault. But can you tell us a little bit more about how you envision the biopolitics of Zhang Jianying? I think if we can unpack that a little bit more, just to understand what you're thinking about her experience and the biopolitics that exist around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for sure, the biopolitics actually, we talk about lots of that in the political science, and especially this discussion, lots of that is from Foucault. And then also as one philosopher I really got lots of inspiration is Giorgio Agamben, a contemporary Italian philosopher. And he developed the idea from Foucault to talk about, relating more about the contemporary political science. And because in ancient Greek, when we talk about politics, it means that somehow, I will just give a very brief introduction and just to talk about how to guide people to a good life. So it's free from Aristotle that he talked about lots of them. So he think the way to guide people, a very basic, haven't become a political animal. We're just at the very beginning start from our personal needs to guide to a good life is through politics. So a benign or good politics should do so. So that's why at that moment, an individual's life is intertwined with the so-called politics or the system, the social system, the judicial system, and also the whole society. And then later, when we put ourselves into such a system, it's so difficult to recognize at which moment that you yourself make this decision, or actually the whole system behind them push you to make that choice. Just like your first question about Zhang Jianying's choice, we will never notice that like she has to initiate the thought to join the Communist Party, or actually she was just influenced by the tendency, at that time, right? So that, and also something this concept helped me to reflect and also think that can easily turn me to a very sad moment is that I always feel sad that at some certain historical moment, a very, you can say naive or innocent person with a very good will that would like to join a very great mission to help people to change the system, to have the reform or revolution. But at the end, they turn out to be used by this system. So they use their own life, a bio, to, it's kind of a sacrifice for the political system. So that's my thought.
Fascinating. I'm fascinated. Let's segue to the website and the objects and the stories. And also I love the idea of Hong, that you're on the airplane and you're sitting there for 21 hours and you're looking at the flight path. And I can only imagine that you saw the trajectory of every one of your future, subjects. So can you share a little bit about what's inspired you to use an object to help tell the story? This is a question from one of our participants.
Thank you for popping out that question. I think I'm always be fascinated by people's object, because I think it's not just an object themselves. I think the object always tell the story about the user, because we didn't choose that object just randomly. I think lots of time we come to buy some object or it's given by the others as gifts with reasons. And so I think that's why it's very, it's worth to discover the story behind them. And also I think by showing the object itself, presenting that on the website is a very direct visual way, because you can see the pattern, the color, and also the style that it can tell maybe the cultural style, cultural elements of the people who come from where, I think very directly. So I think it's powerful. An object can tell its story. Yeah.
I love that. And I have to ask you, I think others would be interesting. You spent some time on this fellowship in New Haven, and what would be your object that you would tell the story of your time in New Haven?
This is a very difficult question because I think I got so many to tell, and it's a very brand new experience for me to stay in New Haven. I did travel once to New York City a couple of years before, but staying in New Haven for half a year is totally different experience because I get to know that the surrounding is kind of a Yale University campus, and also the very quiet environment here. So yeah, I haven't really bought so many stuff since I came here. So maybe some object I can took from the kitchen. I currently live in an apartment. There's something that I think they keep those utensils that using for the American cuisine, which is very different from my experience. I basically cook Chinese food. So when I just came here, I look at the kitchen, so many stuff. I don't know what they use for what, so I don't know the purpose. So it took me for a while to discover this is for cooking this cuisine, that is for that. So I think maybe if the first thought came to my mind is the object in the kitchen.
I love that. And I keep joking with my friends and family that the only utensil you need are chopsticks, because you do everything with chopsticks. And that's always what I grew up with.
Yeah.
And another question about the website, the idea of the object moving. As we know, when you are, like Roshi shared, from immigrant experience, the images we have at the museum and things that we've collected in our artifacts is really just one suitcase.
Yeah.
And you can put just so many things in that suitcase. Can you talk a little bit about how precious, or in Chinese, the word baobei, like just that specialness of those objects? When you were interviewing your subject matters, can you tell us a little bit about the sentiment around the feeling people had when they were describing the object?
Yes, I think lots of the participants I interviewed this time, I think so surprised for me to know that they would choose those objects. Maybe they look so normal. Like one of the friend, the participant, she chose a comb that long time ago, when she just left hometown in China and moved to USA, her father gave her that comb, and then she always took it after her immigration to US and later to Japan. And she's currently in Japan, still using that very modest comb from more than 15 years ago. So I think the sentiment is the subject added to that object. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting projection, how as a subject you project your own emotions, meanings, values, and cultural interpretation, or even the family connection onto that object. And yeah, so there's and lots of different story. And also another participant, she's a asylum seeker right now in UK, and she bought those her teddy bear together with her when she moved from Syria and then to Jordan and then to UK, because I think as an asylum seeker, it's very difficult to tackle lots of the legal issues and also living problem always. So she told me that every night she came back home, she will have those teddy bear. When she bought them, she had them when she was 6 years old, and she always kept them because they always keep a company together with her, those teddy bears. So sometimes she will have them when she was watching TV, or even when she feels so difficult, she was crying, she also had them together. So I think this is not just a teddy bear, it also speaks lots of your personal stories behind.
And subjects being all women, can you tell us a little bit about why? I know you're also an expert and an instructor on gender politics, but were you considering at all broadening it out to immigrants, both of all gender, or were you thinking you really wanted to focus on women because of Zhang Jianying?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is actually very interesting direction, because one, I came up with this idea to make these two projects after I came to New Haven, and so they are almost at the same time I'm developing these two works. So for sure that Zhang Jianying's project influenced my thinking, my creation about this website, that I would like to focus on women, and because I think it's like compromise the contemporary women's story, complement the Zhang Jianying's historical stories. So that's one reason. But the other is also because I'm very much into feminism. I think we should, if I have opportunity, I always would like to come up with those focus on women first, because I think their voice are usually just omitted in the narrative, the so-called grand narrative. We so easy to tend to think that women's experience are something just similar as the universal experience, which I strongly disagree, because I think lots of time women have their special emotion and needs, and also experience that which is different from male. So, but also at the same time, when I talk with my participants, I would ask them the question that as a woman, do you think you have different experience compared with men? But not always do, because some may think that it's more difficult for women to travel alone. That's a very obvious dimension. But also at the same time, some will say currently women are more endowed with more opportunity to get higher education. So it's not always the case that much difficult for women nowadays.
And we'll open it up to questions, so you can certainly ask any questions. I hope Hong is open to this regarding Zhang Jianying and her film. Also questions around her oral history collection and object identification with her 18 subjects. Also, don't forget, Zhang Hong was also in New Haven during a triple whammy of COVID-19, anti-Asian American racism, Black Lives Matter, and the full experience that she has had in New Haven. So please send in your questions via the live comments, and I'll be able to ask them to you, pose the questions for you. But maybe one question to start off with on that. You're very multidisciplinary. And I'm wondering what's next for you as a project. I mean, not only are you so gifted with the film production and the film story and the narrative and the macro narrative that you present with Zhang Jianying, but also you seem to have such a multidisciplinary subject matter under your belt. What's next for you? What are you going to explore as following subject after this fellowship and this experience?
As I know that maybe my background is the basic of my background is from research. I'm not really that, my degree is more in research background instead of practicing artist. So I think about lots of time that how to combine my specialties into artistic practice. So I still keep on exploring that would be the ideal form that I would be confident to jump in and to do my work. So at the end, I found out essay film. So as you see, Zhang Jianying's story was I presented and edited and also narrated as in the form of essay film, because I think it can show that my background in the field analysis, and also I combine lots of theory when I try to interpret my thoughts on Zhang Jianying's story. So this is one direction. The other one is participatory project. I think since I get to know this kind of contemporary art form about a couple of years ago, I was so intrigued by the openness and the virtual the potentiality of this form, because every time you call for a participant, you would never get to know at the very beginning that what it might lead you to where, because it's kind of like you have to think and also consider how the participant, their reaction towards the your ideas and then adjust it, and then at the end maybe you will come up with something very surprising that you would never think about that at the very beginning when you just design that project. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think many of our audience members are very, I guess, transnational in some way, and they're bicultural. They know China, they know the US. And what I've noticed in my own sort of more PRC-based, Hong Kong-based chat conversations, the topics they're covering are very different from what's going on in the US side and some of the main issues that we're dealing with. What has been your placement as far as things that are happening back home in Hong Kong and in southern China versus what is happening here? Do you see any themes that are similar, or how concerned are you about the disparities between the conversations?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very interesting moment that I came here because I got the offer from Yale China Arts Fellowship last year, and then at that time it was just very intense what's happening in Hong Kong at that time, and then I didn't know that after I came here, it's also the COVID happened, and also the Hong Kong protests keep on happening, and also this time Black Lives Matters happened here. So I would have to acknowledge that my knowledge about the racism in United States before I came here is not as much as my understanding on the Chinese politics and also relation with Hong Kong. But this time, after I came here, I get to learn more through lots of time. I learned through the discussion with the participants, because right now I have 18 participants, and I have 3 of them as African American. So they told me the story, and also I can associate with their personal experience with the theory I read from books. So it's kind of like a process to vividing my previous imagination and concept with those like life experience. So yeah, it's a process that I'm very glad that I have this opportunity to learn since I came here. But I think recently I keep on checking news every day, and it's of course very upsetting for me to notice that the intensifying conflicts everywhere in the domestic issues in the United States, and also the international relations between United States and China. I think going to have lots of the problem later. But I just would like to, that's why the first concern I raise is about the nationalism. I try to help or try to find some opportunity to, I think, to influence the audience a little bit about actually the nationalism is not always within that is there, and maybe it's good that we try to unfasten a little bit to unsettle this issue, because lots of time I heard some opinion about Hong Kong problem. They would say you have to look at the big picture about one state's development. So sometimes if you have a very wonderful or ideal future, then you have to sacrifice part of the group, part of some communities' interest to reach to that better or beautiful future. But I always try to let them think about who decide which part of people or which group of people to be sacrificed. What if you happen to be in that group of people? How can you decide that they just, okay, you sacrifice a bit, but later we're going to become a more powerful country? So I think that's sometimes people could be very easy to ride it by this discourse of nationalism. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm thinking so much about the theme of macro narrative and the changing space that we're in right now, and nation building and identity. And I'm wondering, when we think about Chinese diaspora and coming to the United States, we saw natural barriers to presenting their history in textbooks, language barrier, income barrier, no citizenship, legislation, Exclusion Act, and all of these significant barriers that did not allow space for the Chinese American narrative to enter US textbooks despite 200 years of history. I'm wondering, looking at the space that the women that you interviewed as subjects, did you see any barriers to those stories, not becoming more well known? Do they go into a space that is there space for their stories? In the current sort of, I think some of them were predominantly in the US, but some came from different areas in different parts of the world. Is there space in the current American narrative for their stories? That's kind of a broad question, but I think you'll know what I mean by that.
Yeah, I think this pretty worrying issue because used to be, okay, the story, if you the text, the book, or the article, you cannot publish in mainland, then you got published in Hong Kong. So there's usually lots of the people who would like to speak out will find this way. But now I think the space is getting smaller because we all know what's going to happen in Hong Kong. And I think maybe there's on the leeway is that if the Chinese American here, that they would like to support some parts of like the project, so still can help contribute to this voicing out of this being omitted or ignored stories of this individual, which because I think it's very important that a couple of days ago I read an article about famous Hong Kong author Chen Guangzhong. So he just published a book talking about the history of local Beijingers. So he would say we need to tell story again and again, because if we don't tell story or history, it just gradually disappear and nobody knows. So I think lots of time we feel so helpless and not that helpless to solve lots of the very big issues. But at least I think telling story, doing something small, something tiny move, but just help to keep those memories, history, leave to the people in future. They can read it and see it.
Thank you. That's just such a good reminder. We always talk about repetition, repetition, because until you can document it, and also so many stories are told. And I think that's one thing that at least museums have a greater responsibility today to document those stories.
Yeah.
And that's something I think we see the evolution of museums and other historical societies to document, in large part because the textbooks are incomplete. And that there is a responsibility until those textbooks contain those stories that other institutions need to complement that space.
Certainly.
Yeah. Tell us what was the most moving experience you've had during your fellowship time? If you can sort of, create an experience that you really felt was something you won't forget, and it's something you'll tell over and over again to your friends and family about this time in New Haven.
It's very difficult to pick because at the beginning of my fellowship, it haven't happened COVID, so I traveled a couple of times to New York, and also I visit some museum, also MoCA, and this also part of a very wonderful experience of my fellowship because I got to visit somewhere that is very interesting. And then now it happened the COVID-19, and I have kind of like stuck at home, just like I mentioned in the film that I stuck in the Arctic, living in the Arctic right now. So, and then I moved to my connection with the surroundings, changed to online. So I did all the conversation and talk with the participants via Zoom. So I'm very happy that I have this experience. Otherwise, it's just like me start in the small room and without connection with the outside. And also, because before I came here, in a normal situation, I would assume to get connected with more New Haven people around. But because of this situation, it's changed to virtual environment, which is already a very I'm very grateful that I still can have moved that online. Yeah.
You know, Professor Zhang Hong, thank you so much. And your work is one that I will continue to look for. I just think you're such an incredible, energetic, and spirited, and multidisciplinary. You're really what I think, you know, storytelling needs, and the work that you're doing is really so inspiring to me, and I think everyone else who's tuned in onto this call. Thank you so much for being part of the Yale China Arts Fellowship, and I hope that the remaining time you have here will be a fruitful one, and we hope for that you'll be able to extend your fellowship, and then that you'll be able to visit with us again, and we'll certainly be in touch. And thank you for all for joining, and we'll send it over back to Missy for some closing remarks. But that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Hong, for this thought-provoking discussion and presentation. Thank you, Yale China, for this partnership. And thank you for tuning in to watch. We hope that you might come back and join us for another festival event. Check out our website, www.artidea.org, to learn about more festival events happening through June 30th. Also, we hope you might complete our economic impact survey, which will help us better understand our audience and would help you win the chance to win one of 10 $25 gift cards to local restaurants. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again.